The series is, again, my main research work wasn't um in the stuff I was writing about began with clinical mental health kinds of things, but most of my approach to that was more existential. And then I didn't become a therapist. So even my research in there, I wasn't really a therapist. So I didn't really write a whole lot about mental health. But when people hear psychologist, they just assume you're a therapist. And so my phone would ring and churches would say, we're having a mental health awareness thing, or we want you to speak to our church about these. And so I found myself getting these invitations to speak about the current mental health crisis and try to say something helpful. And so the series initially, I want to get to your insight there, which I think is spot on. But the series initially was dealing with the problem of what you were describing is kind of like there's two different poles. One is, and we can frame this in the language of enchantment and disenchantment. So on one side is a completely disenchanted view of mental health and illness, which is it's all a mechanical problem. It's all neurotransmitters and the mechanics of CBT. I go in there and I retrain my thoughts, and that's where I get my right to wellness. And you'll see that among progressive churches where God is evacuated from the conversation. It's almost treated as a biological problem. So that's a very disenchanted view. But on the other side is the very enchanted view of like the prosperity gospel, where mental illness isn't even really a thing. Everything is just a spiritual problem. And then we can kind of name it and claim it, and God will heal us of all of our. So that's a very enchanted view that you don't need. None of this has anything to do with brain chemistry, and none of it has to do with genetics and therapy. Therapy itself is a spiritual failure. So I wrote my series to try to navigate, again, doing what I do, which is please nobody. So I'm going to try to walk in between those two views to kind of say we can admit some good fruits from psychotherapy and medication, but don't have to. So we don't have to. If you take an antidepressant to deal with your mental health issues, we don't have to see that as a sin or a failure. Like there are some biological things in play there, but I also don't want to swing to a triumphalism that assumes that you might not deal with chronic depression, that just might be a burden that you carry. But that doesn't mean God is unfaithful to you. There's ways God helps us, which brings me to your point, which is how does God help us? If we don't want to reduce it to technology or a mechanistic view, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier about existentialism and value. The existentialist psychologists have always argued, this goes back to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, that mental health problems are existential problems. And so in Hunting Magic Eels, I make the argument that our increasing post-Christian culture is creating this crisis of meaning. This should be a very familiar conversation to your people. And so those two are linked. And if that's true, then yes, therapy can be effective and medications may be necessary and prudent in certain situations. But until we deal with the question of values, then we're always going to be dealing with the kind of the drifting that we have. Then because what we've done is if meaning making is critical for mental wellness, and we've deprived people of meaning making structures, this is Peterson's point, then you're going to then chaos overwhelms us. So and so that's where I think he's powerful in that point. That's where I really like what he does by putting value, and by value I mean those are meaning-making structures that give me motivational energy, pulls me into my day with some energy and intentionality. So the series I wrote about this came to an end. In the very last post, I talk about, how can God help us? And one of the things I did point to in that list was meaning in life. And psychologists have again, that's existential, meaning in life, but psychologists have shown that meaning in life is highly predictive of psychological well-being. And then when they study it, when they decompose it, it's three ingredients. And I talk about some of these in Honey Magic Eels. It's your life makes sense to you, like you can navigate it. You have a map of the terrain. Purpose, you're here for a reason. You're moving toward a goal. And third is mattering, which features big in Hunting Magic Eels. Just this, sometimes it's called existential significance. This conviction that your life matters, that has value. It's not a vacuum. And I do think a lot, this is one of the reasons why the conversation that you're having has naturally followed after that initial surge of the new atheists. So the new atheists kind of rocked the world of young men. And that was the thing that captured their imagination. But the backlash is that worldview, that atheistic worldview, being devoid of value and meaning-making structures, you're now at sea, and it hasn't produced good fruit. And thus, this second wave conversation that Jordan Peterson captured that said, hey, you might not believe in any of this religious stuff, but your behavioral structures act as if there are ultimate goods you're pursuing. So let's bring those into view and then use them to give yourself coherence and purpose and significance. And to your point, yes, the evidence is you have those things, you have mental health benefits. So there is a whole meaning-making and existential side to the mental health conversation that you're right. I don't think a lot of psychologists are dealing with what I would describe as the metaphysics of the mental health crisis.